So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bob Werner. I've been in the software industry for about 25 years. I have focused on PPM for the last 15, and the last 10 at CA Technology. So project portfolio management has kind of been what I've been living for a long time. We're going to talk about portfolio management today. Part of the process here, we're going to talk about some slides and overviews of how I relate what CA calls the application economy, and you may or may not be involved with that, and that'll lead to the context of portfolio management and why it's important. And then we'll do a presentation of a quote demo, so I'll show you some screens of the software, so we'll go live into the software. I'm pretty flexible. I've been doing this a long time. If you have questions and you want to stop, we'll stop and we'll talk about things. You know, I've got a topic path, but if the conversation takes it somewhere else, that's fine as well. But the focus is kind of on portfolio management. I just went to the Gartner group presentation on project portfolio management last week or the week before. So I've got some context around what they're saying, so I'll try and pepper that into the presentation as we go along from that perspective. Anybody in the wrong place? Comments, thoughts? Perfect. So CA has come up with this moniker, business rewritten by software, and we talk about this concept of the application economy. And the real driving scenario here is the constant change that's going on. I mean, we can talk about over the years that there's always been change. We've evolved from this to that. We had mainframes, and then we had client server. If we talk about the software industry, we had the radio, the Sony Walkman was the kind of the cool thing, and then it was CDs, and now it's MP3s, or actually it's not, it's just download your music, right? So there's always been change, but I think in the world we're living in right now, things are changing so fast, and the CA Technology looks at it, the way they're changing is relative to the software, that brick and mortar kind of organizations, as well as everything that's out there, is relying on software to do something. And it's driven, if you've heard the concept of consumerization of IT, it's driven by us as consumers who, whether it's we started it or our kids have an iPhone or an iPad or whatever, and we go in and we get something, and we either like it and we use it, or we go, no, and then we go grab something else. And so, we've become fickle, if you will, with the stuff that we want. And we've taken that concept and we've brought it to work with us. And so those tried and true ways of doing things that we've always done, we get the millennials coming in, even ourselves, because we've gotten used to what we can do on our phones. We're like, I'm not going to do that, right? So the context is, how can we be successful as an organization? How can we be competitive, right? We have to be changing to facilitate those kind of thought process that we see from a consumer world. And hence, as an organization has to change, you as a project manager, you as a manager has to be willing to do that as well. I mean, you may be asking or grasping or wanting other things, but to work for a successful organization, you're going to have to look through that process, right, of how can I be more open to change tools, doing things differently. And so that's the concept of what we talk about as business written by software or rewritten. So, there's lots of companies doing what we call disruptive or digital transformation. If we look at Amazon.com, right, they were the bookseller. They were going to just put books out of business, and they did pretty successfully, right? How many bookstores? I know my wife still goes like to a used bookstore to buy some things, but the big box bookstores that were, you're going to go have coffee and you're going to hang out. There's a few of them around, but not so much. Amazon's pretty much put them out of business. But they didn't sit on their laurels, right? They continue to change and transform. Right now, I mean, Amazon is the primary way I shop. So they're going after the Walmarts and the Targets and even the Macy's and those things. So, the context is things are changing, the shifts are there. It's just reinforcing it. Here's a couple of companies that have transformed to give you some perspective on, where that's going relative to, organizational change as well as the economy itself. I alluded to this when I talked about my iPhone. Experience is everything. We're seeing this at CA as well, right? We're looking at our own tools that we provide. We're looking at how we do things. We purchased Rally software about a year ago, and we're actually having them go in and mentor our entire organization on how to do things differently. And one of the components that we're dealing with is you can't do it the way we've always done it. We can't give you a green screen and expect that you're going to provide value associated with that relative to software, but you can transform that everywhere. And so the concept is this experience that we're getting from our kids, right? My grandson, right? He's 7. I mean, he uses an iPad better than I can use an iPad. And I think I'm pretty proficient at it, right? I have one, right? I've embraced it. I take notes on it. I don't use a notebook anymore, right? So I think I'm good at embracing technologies. But, you know, he can get Angry Birds and, you know, shoot, and I try and, I can't even compete with him, right? So that experience that someone that young with that little knowledge, right, can pick up and use something, that's what everybody wants. And so as we look at what we do from project management, from the tools that we use, from a portfolio standpoint, we have to be making sure that we're providing that experience in whatever we do. Whether it's what we use and making sure that we're using the right tools to help us be more effective and efficient, to what are those things we're providing output. I was talking to someone downstairs, and he said, I'm an accidental project manager. And I said, how come? And we hear that a lot, right? People that were not professionally trained. And he said, well, I was a good graphics person, so I was putting together programs, and the stuff that I did, people could understand and it looked good. So they said, hey, you need to manage projects. Well, that fits, you know, and he was doing that a long time ago, right? So the concept of today, that's not the, oh, we're going to put you in a good position and promote you because you do that. That's now expected, right, as we look at that experience. I'll stop. Comments, questions, thoughts?
How do you measure? Based on what you're saying, I understand you mentioned beauty and simplicity.
Yep.
They are the two factors that you want to convey. How would you measure that experience?
Sure. So I can tell you from the perspective of how we've done our applications. You know, traditionally, what we've done with that experience is we may have asked a question and said, well, what do you think? Or we've sent out a survey and said, what do you think? Or we've looked at the traffic. You know, you think about websites now in the more near term. How many people click on, or how long do they stay? And you know, there's products and stuff that do that. But we've looked at our project portfolio management solution, and one of the things that we've done is we're changing the way we develop our apps. And the way we're doing it, or the way we're measuring it, is by actually going out to these customers and interviewing them. We're videotaping them so that we can replay that. And we're not asking them, how do you use our software? We're asking them, how do you do your job? And the context is that we found, and this will relay into that accidental project manager, we found in our own PPM solution that we have ignored the accidental project manager. We got the PMP certified project manager, we got them down. We got every risk, tick-tock thing that they need. They can get it, they can get all the stuff, they can do everything they want, they can do the reports that they need. But that accidental project manager just says, I kind of got a list of things I need to do, I just need to check it off, and I need to spit out a report to say we're done. Yeah, but we could do that, but it's really complicated. So, you know, that was the long answer. The short answer is you can't just do that kind of fly-by survey. The way we're developing software today at CA, right, is the concept of actually understanding the personas that are using the software, but how they're getting their business outcome, or doing their job would be the business outcome in that scenario. So, we kind of talked about this. This kind of summarizes some of the things that we talked about, what we're trying to do relative to the application economy, right? The business models, the digital disruptors, you know, what our customers want, right? We talk about that from the personal standpoint, fast, reliable, secure, and that fits into what CA Technology does as a general scenario. And then, you know, we asked the question, but I think we've covered that. So, as we go through this process then, are you ready to transform your business, right? Are you prepared? And this is what we ask our customers. This is what we talk to the marketplace about. You know, we're pretty bold about it. You're the underdog, right? I mean, that's a bold statement in the politically correct world we live in, right? We're saying something nasty about somebody, right? That's a negative connotation. But the value proposition is if we don't shake you a little, are you going to be left behind, right? And it's our responsibility, or we're taking it on as our responsibility, right, to take you through that process, to help you move from where you are to where you should be, if you will. So a quick commercial on what CA does and how we've broken this out. You know, what we're focused on here today, and we'll get to this quickly, is kind of the agile management. You know, you heard a lot of agile here today, right? And you hear PMI talk about it. Back in the day, you would have never heard anything about agile management. It's PMBOK, methodology, hard and fast. We're part of the agile management division, the project and portfolio management. But this tells you how important agile has become and what's going on.
I've seen agile application lifecycle management.
Yeah.
There is a life cycle to it, and there is management to it.
Yeah. So the other thing that we see as we look through this process is, because what we're doing over here, right, is we're figuring out what do we need to do when we're executing on it, but what else do we need to go along with it, right? If we look along, see it provides this security layer, right? You guys hear it in the news all the time, right? It's X number company got broke in. LinkedIn, my dad just sent me an email about LinkedIn that you know, they're selling lists. It's like, okay, Dad, that's about 6 months old, but okay, yeah, I took care of it, right? But the perspective is, this is so important. I mean, China just broke in, right? Russia just broke into the Democratic National Committee, right? So the perspective, security is critical. And then how do we actually deliver that quickly, right? So it's fine that we build it quickly, but how do we actually get that out to the masses, whatever that delivery is, DevOps we call it, or whatever an acronym is. We're focused on the agile thing, but understanding the bigger picture here relative to project portfolio management. So let's move into project portfolio management. So Joe came up with the scenario for the question, right, to say, you know, we start from ideas to outcomes. You know, what do you do at CA Technologies? And when we focus on project portfolio management, that's what we do here. You know, the concept of strategic planning, and this is going to align with the portfolio. You know, it's not okay just to have a group of stuff, right? That's how I used to define portfolio management. It's just a group of stuff. The focus now is well, where does that align? Is it a strategic initiative aligned with our objectives as a company to move us forward? Do we separate our portfolios relative to the concept of, you know, is this the keep the lights on in the traditional IT sense or from a business standpoint? Because we got to keep these apples to apples, right? It's very hard to say and prioritize you know, we need to do the back end upgrade to Microsoft to the newest version because we're not going to be supported, to the, hey, we got to do this cool website so our customers can interact with us better so we can sell more stuff, right? Sell more stuff, right? But if we don't do the other one, we're going to go out of business or something, right? I mean, so there's a balance, but you got to be able to compare them. So that strategic planning is really critical in what we're going to talk about relative to portfolio management. But then as we go through the process, right, what are we going to work on? The demand, what's coming in, you know, evaluating that, scoring that, making sure that we're working on the right things. Not a new concept, right, but it's been around. Although I would tell you customers, or businesses, probably better term, look at this and say, do we really need demand management? We'll just do whatever we need to do, right? Well, it's becoming more and more critical to be specific about what we're working on. We do not have unlimited budgets. Now, maybe a couple of you guys do, and I get that. There's some folks, we don't care about spend. We got it. But you really got to focus on what is that demand management. The portfolio management aspect of it, right? Being able to have visibility is one aspect. How are we doing? And then the other piece of it, right, the strategy alignment piece of it, prioritizing. What should we actually be working on? And the key here that's changed as we look today, you know, we call this annual planning, right? And the perspective there is once a year, we get together as an organization, we spend 5 months putting our budget, right, because it's usually tied with our budget, and we say these are the things that we're going to do. And then all of a sudden we start executing them. And then we run out of money and da-da-da. Well, if you wait 5 months to budget and you only plan once a year, as I was just talking about my iPhone and how fast that I get bored with an app and get rid of it if it doesn't do what I want to do, if I wait that long to manage my portfolio, where am I going to be as an organization? Right? I'm going to miss it. Yeah, go ahead.
That comes back to the demand management.
Yes.
The way I understood what you said is, it seemed more of prioritization. Which tasks are we prioritizing? Is that how we prioritize, or is it based on which job, the customer's job, are we trying to fulfill, or which value segment? How is that value demand management deployed from a value segmentation perspective, or is it from customer job we're trying to fulfill, or is it from strategic program initiative perspective?
So you're probably not going to like my answer.
Okay.
It's going to be all of them, right? The perspective is, with the constant set of change that we have going on, you have to keep your finger on the pulse. So when I talk about a portfolio, you better be slicing that portfolio in those different metrics so that you've got an idea, how are things bubbling up based on where we are, what's our compelling scenario that we have to deal with. And all of those could possibly be true. Now, we talk about focus, right? You can't be everything to all things, right? That's never good. But if you're not keeping a pulse, you're going to struggle. And one of the value props at CA relative to our portfolio management is we can actually allow you to see it in those different slices. And there may be 10 other slices that are relative that you didn't mention.
Yeah.
And the focus is saying that, what is our definition of what does portfolio management mean? And what are the different slices that I have to look at?
So the prioritization is on the portfolio management, but the view is on the demand management side. Is that what I'm understanding?
Well, but see, ideation and demand can be part of the portfolio. So when we talk about portfolio, we don't only include in-flight work. We also look at the concept of what are these new things. Because we talk about this iterative planning approach that I'm talking about, and I'm not talking about Agile here. I'm talking about portfolio management. I'm saying you cannot do an annual plan and be successful. You have to do an iterative plan, whether it's monthly that you have to relook at your portfolio, whether it's quarterly, depending on your business, right? A more brick and mortar based scenario probably can go to a quarterly, but you can't do an annual plan. And the perspective is even if you're doing quarterly, how soon is that disruptive company, like an Amazon, right, going to come up and take you out? Right, with something else. So you really got to look at that planning. Financial management is important. I think the concept is that we look at from an Agile perspective is that they don't think about financial management, but we still have to fund these initiatives. Companies do not have unlimited funding, so thinking about that from when we're managing our portfolio, we need to still keep an eye on the budget. We need to keep an eye on our resources, right? Those are constraints associated with what we're doing. And then when we look at project execution, we talk about, is it still a traditional waterfall? Is it waterfall and Agile, or is it strictly Agile? And, depending on what you're doing and where you are in your maturity level as an organization, it could be all of those. And we help provide that. So when we talk about, what is project portfolio management at CA, that's the concept. Comments, questions? All right, so now we'll get into the meat of the scenario. How are we doing on time here? Okay, just 15 minutes, good. So I went out to the web, and I thought this was interesting to look at these definitions, and I'm not going to read them to you. But PNMI has a definition of portfolio management. Everybody has one, right? Gartner has a scenario associated with what they're doing. Just because it came off the Gartner, I was interested in how they expanded theirs, right? They're talking about other systems. Now, part of the scenario is Gartner's, got to be relevant and they got to make money and continue to be consultative. So you're going to see the definitions be out there and more. But I thought it was interesting that they add systems to the scenario. Any thoughts on what you guys think portfolio management is different, or what you would think about?
I think of it as either a system or a program or a product or an operation.
Okay. Yeah, we call operations services, but similar concept. Anybody else? Okay, no worries. So, what was interesting, there's some principles around portfolio management on prioritization, and I looked through some of the traditional stuff that we've done in the past, and the knowledge that I had, and then I went through some of the Gartner stuff, the more current. I didn't attend all the sessions, and it was interesting that while I've just talked about disruptive technologies, the concept of portfolio management and what you need to consider or drive really hasn't changed significantly. So when we look at this slide, we'll spend a little time here before we get into the product. But these are pretty constant. So these came from Gartner's scenarios, but they're not different, right? So one of the concepts is, what are the corporate strategies, and are my investments aligned? So that's what I started to talk about up front. So one of the key scenarios that they're talking about 2 weeks ago, right, is making sure that you're just not creating portfolios and executing on stuff. The focus is saying, I need to have strategies. And what's interesting to me is I'll go do a presentation to one of our prospective customers, and I'll read their 10K, right, or somebody will have read it. And there's always a strategy, right? The CEO has said something to the world. And it's amazing to me, even today, that I'll make that comment in that demo I'm doing, where one of the things I'm showing is project portfolio management. And I'll say, and so in your 10K, it says your CEO says one of your strategies is this, so I would assume, and I look across the room and I get a bunch of blank stares. Well, what that says to me is I'm trying to sell them a piece of software to help them. They don't even know what they need help for. I mean, my Marketing 101 class back in the day, right, said that all the fishes need to swim the same way, meaning everybody's ideas should be focused on, if everybody's thinking different things, we're not going to be successful. And so when you think about strategy, what are you doing? And are you aware or informed about that strategy that your corporation has, right? Or your business or your mom and pop bakery, right? It doesn't have, you don't have to be big and ugly to have a strategy. But is what I'm doing helping facilitate that strategy? And from an organization to be successful, for me personally to be successful, with my family, with doing the project in the backyard, do I have a strategy? Am I going after to do something? If I'm not aligned, that can be messy. And I think too much in this business that we have, we ignore. And it's, well, that guy was screaming the loudest, so we'll set him up and prioritize him more. When we talk about these strategies, and I mentioned this a minute ago, the other thing that I hadn't seen before, and I thought was pretty interesting in one of the sessions at Gartner, was a lady got up and talked about separating those portfolios. Now, typically, and even in my demo set that I'm going to show you, we kind of say, well, there's a portfolio by business line, or there's a portfolio by this, kind of grouping of things. More generic, what you would expect in a corporation. But the concept that they had was, it's really hard to measure and compare and contrast investments. We'll call these investments projects, or whatever we're working on, that are different. So you have to have some common scale, right? And sometimes we use ROI as a common scale. That's really what it is. You don't have to be a financial genius to figure it out. It's really just a way to say, how do we prioritize these? But she took that a step further and she said, that's cool. However, as I mentioned up front, how do we compare and contrast something that's going to drive my customers to buy more stuff with something that keeps the lights on? There's no comparison. And so why would I have a portfolio that had both of those types in it? And the message was, what you need to do is put like things together in a portfolio at a high level to help you prioritize, and then you need to assign budget. So one of the things Gartner talks about, right, is to say that and this number's been around for a while, right? 65% of what we invest in from an IT perspective is usually keep the lights on, or whatever you want to call it, depending on your business. There's 17 different names, but in general, it's the status quo, just to keep us surviving. And so if that's the number that you have, and you're working with that, and maybe you go for a target to say, let's spend less because we want to invest more and make us faster, better, more competitive, more disruptive, all those things we've been talking about. Let's put all those investments in there and then constrain that by then that budget. Here's 65% of my spend, and then let's constrain it by that. So we've constrained the portfolios to say 65, 20 or 30, for the next two portfolios, right? Not a math major, so we won't add all those up and assume they're going to be 100, but they should be. And then you can more strategically prioritize, yeah, we do need to upgrade to Microsoft, right? That's important, but how is important relative to all the other things that we need to do that aren't really going to make us any money, right? And this is capitalist society, right? Generally what we're talking about is making us more money, right, in general. I mean, we can talk about we want everybody to be happy, right? We want to solve world hunger, but it's usually about making more money. And so separating those kind of portfolios, I think, is really important. I thought that was pretty interesting, the way we've always talked about, we spend this amount here and this amount there, but the concept of making sure that we're measuring as we look at different things, keep them separate, measure them by things that are comparable, but just give them a chunk of money to fit into that.
How does long-term, short-term come into play? Because yes, we're in a business of making money, but usually that also could drive us to making the wrong decision, because on the short term, yes, there is more money coming from this stream, but it's not solving the problem. It's not doing more job. So that's why I'm more interested in the demand side.
Yep.
In how do you judge it from a viewpoint of long-term and short-term?
Yeah, so I think that's a good segment, or segue into some of the other components of it. There's a couple things, right? When we look at business in general, I agree with you 100%. Public businesses that are focused on that quarterly number, they lack sometimes the vision, even to some of these smaller corporations that are being disruptive, because they don't have to report to the street, they don't have to manage that common flow. What we're going to talk about, I'm focusing on a couple metrics here now, but that's not the only metric. So when I talk about this 65%, I'm focused you on one specific area. What I'll show you in the demo, right, is when we look at our portfolio, we have to have multiple metrics that we're dealing with constraints. We have the typical ones, right? The typical is, do I have the budget? Do I have the right resources to accomplish that, to be successful? But then for my industry, for my organization, what are those metrics and components, right, that I also need to measure to keep a handle on? So that's one aspect of what I think what you're asking, right, is to say, well, how do I keep a pulse on the short term and the long term? So one aspect is to say, well, I need to look over the portfolio and make sure that I have additional things. What are my future goals as an organization, so that I keep those in mind as well? And so when I'm comparing and contrasting, I'm also keeping a pulse on that. Then the other piece of it is you look at the shorter term portfolio management. What am I executing on now? But then there's also that larger portfolio that maybe is a 3 to 5 year scenario that you're looking at that, and then you're more of a top level scenario. And what you're prioritizing is more strategic initiatives instead of the actual work that you're executing on. And so managing to that as well will help you through that process. So great question. You do have to keep the pulse on them. My focus for today was less on the big strategy, which we can do, right? And I think is important, and more on that kind of what's going on this year and making sure that we're iterating through that and not continuing to build something or work on something that is no longer relevant. Because as humans, right, we want to finish things. And in this business, we want to kill things as fast as possible. It would be great, and it's painful to see that we spent 3 months working on something that we're going to throw away. But I'd rather throw it away after 3 months than throw it away after 2 years, right? And so the disposable nature, I think, is important. So we've talked a little bit about resources. Do I have the right or enough resources to meet my objectives? This brings into play resource management, and then you go, well, how does portfolio and resource management? Portfolio is just the selection of. Well, it doesn't do me any good to say these are the 5 things that I'm going to build when I don't have the right people to execute on it. Now, if we have unlimited money, can we go get contractors to help out? Can we manage those contractors? So my tell to you would be that you have to keep a pulse on the resources as well. And there's a couple things that are going to go along with it. Number one, do I have the right people to execute on this quickly and do it, right? But number two, what's the trend? You know, if we look at the individual roles, right, and I'm not talking about Joe, Sue, and Bill that we're managing at this level. I'm talking about, you know, in IT, is it an architect or is it a designer or a developer? You know, in business, you know, what are the different scenarios that you have there? Because, you know, you can cross this across. But when I look at those different things, it's, do I see a trend that all of a sudden, you know what? Last year we used 20 architects a month, and now we're using like 5. So looking at that information as you manage a solution over time, I think is important, because what you can do is you can decide, hey, while the architects are going down, we're seeing a spike somewhere else, because assumedly you're seeing some different spikes elsewhere. And so the value proposition around resources then is focused on, you know, what do I do with my people? Do I retrain them? Well, if I know now, if I'm seeing a decline, and as I look out to the 5-year plan, and I'm seeing the kinds of initiatives that I'm going after don't have those kind of resources, then what should I do? Is it a lot cheaper for me to start retraining the folks I have now? Do I decide that, you know, I need to start hiring a different type of people? And I can't retrain those people? But if I make that decision now instead of 6 months from now, what's the cost savings to me? From a hard dollar standpoint, from a people relationship standpoint, because we need to keep our consumer internal, right? Our employees, we need to keep them happy, right? So there's a lot to balance around resources.
So can you be able to model?
Do what?
Can you be able to model your decision plan?
Absolutely. And I would suggest that if you don't have a solution that allows you to do that, that you're missing a piece of the pie. Now, granted, you can't do all this stuff overnight. I'm not suggesting, poof, you just change your organization, because I think we know a little bit about change management, but these are important objectives to be successful. I think this is a big one. When I complete a project, am I reviewing the realized benefits? I've been at CA for 10 years, and we've had this thing called benefits. It's attached to the project. Every customer I go in, and I don't like to use every and never, but every customer I go into said, man, that would be really nice to do. And none of them do it. And, you know, that's the history peril, right? You know, you're destined to repeat history if you don't know what's going on. And so what I thought was interesting about this, and I got this tidbit from the Gartner as well, because, you know, people are like, well, how do you understand, did I get that return on that investment? How do you calculate? And one of the presenters there that I thought was interesting said, it would be great to have all these hard dollar things and be able to kind of say, hey, our revenue went up by X number of dollars and so forth. Love to do that, and some people actually do. But wouldn't it be valuable if at a minimum you sent out to your stakeholders a survey, a very simple survey, not none of these complex 500-line surveys, that just said, did it help me? Did it not help me? Did it make my job worse? And then you put a number to them, 0, 1, 2, 3. Maybe you ask them 3 questions. You can get a score. Back to my ROI comment. We can do it across the board, and we can compare how are we doing. And then we can look at that from a lessons learned standpoint or from a business benefit to say, you know what, this wasn't a good project. Then maybe we go in and we interview those people in a face-to-face, like I talked about how we're designing software now, and we figure out, you know, what is the thing we're missing. Because what we don't want to do is continue to redo things the same old way and not provide any value. Because I'm going to tell you that disruptive little company that's coming up with the next thing They're not going to be doing that. They're going to be just, hey, let's, you know, they don't have any baggage, so they just kind of figure it out and move forward, right?
So that's part of the rapport indicators.
Yep. So in this scenario, business benefit, whether it's a simple survey, and I was telling somebody about a survey the other day, and they said, yeah, we tried that. Well, with anything, you have to have sponsorship within your organization, right? You can't just say, hey, I'm going to send out a survey and then assume that people are going to fill it out. There's got to be an executive sponsor, and I think this you would deal with anything in your wife. Our executive sponsor in my household is my wife. If she doesn't buy in, nothing's getting done. And so a survey is useless if you don't have that sponsorship to say, hey, yeah, this is important. But how do we improve our business? Just like I talked about improving our user experience, right? If we go interview these folks, and we figure out how they're doing their job, and we design the software to help them do their job, are we going to be successful? Absolutely. We talked about the alignment of goals, right? How often do we look at them? Moving from that annual planning. And we talked about separating the portfolios out. Look at there. It's time for the demo. So we'll show you some software.
Sure.
It's probably timed out. Let me just go ahead and log out and
Who
log
are
back
some
in.
of your clients?
Bank of America is the client here in town.
Yeah, I know other than Bank of America. Yeah, we know them.
Another bank is BB&T.
Lowe's, Home Improvement,
Who else?
Lowe's, Home Improvement,
Okay.
VF Corporation, and Care, over in Greensboro.
We got a lot of healthcare, Blue Cross Blue Shields. There's a lot of those.
Okay.
Hospitals, financial services organizations, ING, or whatever they're called now, uses us. MetLife. And those are the big companies that you would know. You know, we do a lot of SaaS, and what you're seeing here is a SaaS version of the software. So, you know, somebody with a company like 50 users is kind of the starting point. So we got some really small, innovative companies that use the solution as well. The good news about the product is it does scale.
Yeah, we have implementations as low as 25 seats, all the way up to, 50,000, literally.
So I got about 15 minutes, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, you know, I talked to you about portfolio management, and this is a portfolio, and this is an executive view in the context of how well am I doing, right? Kind of the outcome scenario. So the names here, you know, are to protect the innocent, business unit 1, 2, and 3. The concept, though, that I talked about is being able to say, what are these portfolios? Are they separated out by the right groupings, right? Business unit is not a bad scenario in a general sense. But then we talk about, well, can I also look at them so that I say, well, what's the stuff that I need to get done to support just in flight, right? What's going on in the world? What's the stuff that's innovation, right? That's going to make us better? And what's the stuff that's going to help drive additional revenue, right? And kind of keeping those buckets separate. In our solution, we can allow you to look at a business unit, and then you can flip a switch. Up here, you see it says BU, and then you can look at it in a different way. And so the perspective is then what are the metrics? And I'm being very generic here intentionally by metrics to say what are those KPIs or metrics that you're tracking that are important to your business. Because when we talk about portfolio management, we talk about project management, we can say it's just portfolio management. It's the same for everybody. I always love the customers that I go into and they go, well, we're different. Well, from a general sense, you still have a group of stuff, right? We'll go back to simplicity. Where they differ is they have different metrics that they care about or that their industry cares about. So there's some uniqueness, but it's not strategically different. There's some things that they care about and they need to model. So when I talk about metrics, it doesn't really matter what I say this pretty picture is. What matters is that I have a metric that I'm comparing. So in my portfolio, in this case, I'm looking at planned cost versus distributed cost. So simply, I'm looking at budget. Some organizations, like if you're in new product development, you don't care about budget. Your job is to innovate. you have different metrics. So if you're doing new product development, the metrics that you're going to show here can have nothing to do with these. But my point is give the opportunity for somebody to visualize what that is. And then that same chart is represented down here in numbers. And I think that's important as well. As we talk about us as human beings, some of us are very number-centric. And if we don't see a number, it doesn't make any sense to us. Others are very graphic. And if we see a number, we don't care. And that would be me. Numbers, I like to see pictures. But the perspective of both of these tell a story, a similar story, right? Just depending on the audience. And so know your audience as you're looking at how you present these components. So this is kind of that overall. There's some additional components down below, but in general, it's comparing those portfolios together to give me a view of how well am I doing, and am I kind of doing the right things at a high level.
So good customer is good because from my experience was if it's a center of excellence, the measurement that we wanted to see was cost center, under recovery, and the projects, the list, and then how are they doing, and then the head count, how much is it and where is it heading, and then the other one was just the business itself, like the growth. So
Yep.
how is this all generic one you have to follow, or is there something else that if there is a, because the global team wants to see the same slide everywhere. So
Sure. Well, and that's the best practice too, right? If you think about, in general, focusing on your last point, and then we'll get to the other ones in a second. But if we look at different businesses within a business, right, and there's a lot of that, conglomerations. We also look at different user teams, right? An executive wants to see one thing, the next level down needs information as well. It's important that you satisfy the views and needs of those different groups, but it's also more important that you have a characteristic of 5 or 6 common metrics that everybody sees. And I don't know that I care that they agree with those metrics, but we all agree that we're going to provide them. And then those things that are unique to you, you can get and go off and get different views to facilitate those. But we have to have a common language across. If we talk about being successful, that common language, when we deploy these solutions, is critical. Now, one of the value props that we talk about when I present CAPPM is, tell me what metric you want. I can put it in there. You want shoe size on your resources? I got it. I can do that. Because you can, doesn't mean you should. And so while I tell people that they can do a lot of these things, you need to really focus on, that's why I say 5 metrics, and maybe you've got plus or minus whatever. Again, I go back to the human effort. As humans, we look at PowerPoint slides, presentations, whatever it is. We can remember 3 to 5 things. Most of us. There's some of us that are much smarter that can take more, but most of us 3 to 5 things. So you got to keep it simple. When we look at this, I want to show you a few more things, so we'll move on here. But kind of here's that resource view. Still at a high level. So we're not digging into, is it project managers versus architects or whatever, but what kind of resources are we using to satisfy these needs that we just talked about? We showed it in cost, now we're showing it in resources as an example. Both of those are relative and important. One is a measure of the other, right? Because resource times dollar gets you cost. Health. That's an important metric as we look at the projects that we're prioritizing. If we have a project that's in poor health and we look at our need for it, should we continue on with that? Back to my concept of killing the project. And health, I don't necessarily like that term because it means a lot to a lot of different people. And so what is your metrics relative to health? That was a summary that we called health. And there's 5 or 6 things that make up what health is. But I would tell you, as we look at portfolio management, it's critical not only from the prioritization standpoint that we talked about, but also what are those metrics that we care about, and making sure we're illustrating where we're spending our money, what we're doing relative to that, to be successful. Because if we're focused on the wrong things, i.e. kind of day-to-day management, we're going to find our company out of business. We're going to find us out of business, right? Because I'm not doing the right thing to help the company. And so, you know, the quote application economy, as we continue back to what we at CA think is important, right? It's critical that we move fast. And not fast for fast's sake. I mean, we have to be informed. But, you know, I forget who claims the adage, but, you know, you'd rather spend, you'd be 80% right and get it done than 100% right and not be right, you know, and not get it done. I kind of messed that up, but I think you get the general gist of, you know, at some point you got to cut and go. You know, finance and some analysis, we'll skip that for now, but, you know, I think the context of, you know, that overview. So let's talk a little bit about a portfolio and metrics and health. So when I talked about the constraints of a portfolio, what our solution does, and what I think that you want to do relative to this is, right, is be able to prioritize. And so, you know, here's the name of the investments. We look at this concept of the water line. The water line is what can we accomplish with the constraints that we put on it. And in this case, the constraints that I do is cost, right, a specific type, some resource constraints of analyst and developer. So very simplistic. To say, I want to make sure of that as I look at my portfolio, these are things I care about. Now, you may look at me, well, Bob, none of those are strategic to me. Cool. That's the intent, right? Because I'm not trying to tell you what's strategic for you guys. I want you to go to your 10K and understand what the organization, and maybe it's out of date, right? It's done quarterly, but, and maybe you're not public, so then I'm, you know, blowing smoke, right? But the perspective is, you know, what are those metrics that are valuable to you? And I would also tell you that this concept of having metrics-based portfolio management and having the system tell you, based on those metrics, what you should work on, that is a mature organization. So you probably don't start out with that. But where you should be going to, or where you should be migrating to, is the concept of saying, I need to be evaluating these metrics. And instead of executive number one coming in and, I need you to do this. Well, why do you need me to do that? Don't ask me why. Well, this allows you to help prove what are the right things that we're doing. Because generally, we do not have the resources, right, to just do everything.
So is there a way, that means there's a way to weight the constraints?
Correct. And that's, so that takes you, as we look at that concept, right, we see these ranking rules. So you define, and I'm not going to get into those, but you define what the rules are, what are the metrics that you care about, how they rate and rank relative to each other, and then the system will spit out a scenario that tells you this is what you should be working on. And the value proposition to that in a mature organization, you can go to your executive team and say, this is what we should be working on, but based on what you told me is our priorities. On the other side of it, if we look at a more immature organization, and I don't mean that negative in any concept, but when you're starting out, it may be that I just simply drag this line and say, well, if I move and I do these 10, what does it do? Don't tell me, system, what I should be doing. Or, you know, that cranky guy just said he needs this network thing, so let me move it up here. And I say, well, look, I just added your network thing. It just blew our cost out here, and we don't have enough developers. So you can say, I'm going to make you do that, and you can go talk to my boss and the other guy's boss, and that's cool. But we're physically not going to be able to do it unless we change. So the change is I need more people. And so now you have a rational way to explain, I need more people.
So this
Doesn't mean you're going to get them, right? Most likely what's going to happen is they're going to say, well, what's this stupid project, right? Who owns that? Let's get rid of that. But that's okay, because without this, somebody managing a portfolio is set up for failure. And that's just silly, right? So it's not like, oh yeah, just add it to the list, we'll try and get it done. Well, what happens to that? Well, I can get it done in March. Well, March really is, you didn't ask me what year, right? So it's 2020 is when you're going to get it. But it's on the list. And so, you know, that's an important piece is the visualization. One of the things that we've seen our customers change from is kind of those steering meetings that they did where they had the piece of paper and they had to generate a PowerPoint. And then somebody said, well, what if we do this? And then they go, oh, okay, well, all right, fine, the steering committee's over. And then somebody goes back and says, I can't do that. Well, they take this into the meeting. And they say, here's the portfolio we're going to talk about. Here's the 3 we're going to talk about, or whatever that is. And then they have that discussion right there. They make that decision there. That doesn't mean it's a comfortable position, right? It's kind of like our politics right now. Pretty crazy, right? No matter what side you're on, right? It's crazy going on.
One more variable that is missing is the equipment side. You can follow it with a planned cost, but the time variable is another part where if you have a survey, you have a lead time.
Yeah.
So that lead time will impact, even though all these 3 are green, if the lead time variable is will throw you off too.
Yeah, and so that's all in, if you look to the right, and we've got it represented with the Gantt on the right. So the concept of, I'm pulling out a few components of what we're talking about here, but the other side of it is, absolutely, how long it's going to take associated with those resources, when are they start and end. That's included in this as part of the constraints that you can use. And there's 100 million other things, right? And I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the perspective is we provide a template for this portfolio for you, and then the perspective of when you implement a solution, right, ours, of course, then you're going to decide what are the metrics that are important to me, and then we're going to build this out as part of that deployment to say these are the ones we care about. And I'm doing this for a specific portfolio. If you look up here, I have this concept of plan, and I can also set up different scenarios. And what that means is that's kind of a what if, and then I can save it. And so Joe said they'd love it if I did this. Sue said if we did this, she'd love it. And then we can do those different scenarios, see what the impacts are to our scenario. There's a report that will look at them side by side, so we can say these are in, these are out for the different things, and to help you better decision relative to what you're doing in that portfolio. And then you can see a bunch of tabs up here, right? There's a lot of other information. And I haven't even drilled into to most of it. So I'll stop for a second. Other comments or questions? Portfolio management, prioritization?
As long as building this out, you supply the demo and when you come on site to build it out with the company, I guess it's how deep you drill down, how long it takes to implement it.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great point. So when you look at how do I do this portfolio prioritization, and we talk about the demand, and we really didn't even talk about what these are, right? I call them investments in a generic sense, but what these are and how much information, it may very simply be, here's the 5 elements that I know, and somebody just types those in. And then we go through and look at our body of work and say, how do we go through and then prioritize and manipulate and validate and so forth in it. On the other side, this particular view that I have in the way it was drafted is these are actually ideas that have been vetted out. These are projects that may or may not be in flight, that have project plans with them. They have issue logs and risk logs, and they have status reports associated with them. So this is the full gamut. And so then the context of how people use this, the way I'm positioning it here is, hey, we're in flight and we're reevaluating our portfolio of what we got going on. Somebody had a great idea that they think is going to transform the world. How do we look at that mixed in with what we got going on? You can look at it that way. But you also can look at it, well, let's start doing our annual plan. Because I'm not saying we don't do annual planning. You have to think about what is the strategic thing we're going to do 2 years out, 3 years out, 5 years out. But then for those kind of exercises, I'm just going to have a high-level list of investments. I'm not going to have all this detail behind it. Now, as time goes on, those investments that you have listed, you may add additional detail, right, just depending on how you're going at it. I mean, because, we talk about project planning as we get into the weeds of this. If you think about, I think it's going to take about 100 hours. Well, that's kind of crazy, right? Now, maybe I've been doing this 100 years, and that type of project I've done 50 million times, so I can say that, and it's accurate. Most people can't do that. So then the concept is vetting it out, right? Start to build out a plan, start to build out a justification, start to build out criteria, right? All the things that are going to kind of give you the idea, what is that?
And also, about, you mentioned with the weight factor.
Mm-hmm.
Does the CEO's opinion weigh twice as much as other stakeholders? You know, how do you validate the individual weight scale?
Yeah, I mean, you know, hopefully as an organization we'll have agreed upon what those metrics are, and then we set them up. And then, you know, the concept of review, right? You want to continually review those. And I would also say, and by the way, the risk over here, you see the yellow, red, green, it also has a score associated with it, so we're actually exposing what the score is for that particular one, so that kind of helps you figure out the ranking piece of it. But you have to get some kind of agreement organizationally, and then you definitely need to review those. And there's always going to be the exception to say that, yeah, this is where we're going, but we need to kind of chip out.
Is it possible to build 2 profiles or 3 profiles? Like, let's say, okay, this is an aggressive profile, this is a conservative profile, and then based on that profile, that's the scores, and based on this profile, that's the scores. Is there a way to do that? Like,
yeah, the solution will allow that. I'm not sure I would agree with that as being an appropriate strategy.
no, the reason why I brought that up is if there is a 10, 20 concenters and giving 20 individual weighting factor could be a lot to manage. Okay, maybe can we reduce it to 3 and an average one, and then 2 take the extremes, and then can we get a view? That's the reason why I brought that up.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think generally what we do and see as a best practice, right, is this concept of, you see what the naming convention here called goal alignment and portfolio plan, is you create those and then you have and can look at them differently, and then you derive and say, okay, I understand the risk score here is higher, and we're willing to take that risk under, but you didn't actually change the metric, you just show the different plans and say how they vary from the metric versus actually changing the metric.
And I think the key point is the solution actually has that flexibility. I start with the projects, and then I can roll them up, and I get to decide how do I group them by business unit, do I group them by cost center, and so that you actually have that flexibility within the software of saying, okay, we start at the lowest level project, we gather, we interface with whatever our financial systems are, and you can actually create those scenarios. So you can do that.
Sure, absolutely.
I hate to cut you off because we're going to drive up because they're lining the door. So.
No,
But
we're
I do
good.
think that that's the point, is the software, this solution allows you to break it apart and get all the way to the big C-level guys who really want to see this picture.
And we'll take you as deep as you want to go with the group, so.
Yeah.